Please join me in the sermon reading, if you would. Mark writes this for us. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So we're looking at this book by John Ortberg called The Life You've Always Wanted. And we put up here, Dare to Live the Life You've Always Wanted. And this week, as you see, it's going to be called The Unhurried Life. And this is an important one for us to get if we're going to be dealing with the rest of this in the next weeks to come. Now, as we started last week, we talked about the title of the sermon was called Becoming That Person. And it was about allowing God's transformation into our lives. And that transformation takes place as we put ourselves into God's loving presence. Now, as we talked last week, we saw that we are God's masterpiece. Remember that? Who was here last week? We're God's masterpiece. We are the only ones, humanity, created in the imago Dei, the image of God. And as we talked about that last week, the curse of sin has kind of marred that image of God. It's defaced it just a little bit. We have broken places now. We have some rough areas, don't we? But that's the idea. God says, you're a masterpiece, and what I want to do is I want to transform you and just work you right back to the place where you are, right there again, that masterpiece in its fullness, without the curse of sin and all that's been defaced. But I'm going to bring you back to that original beautiful image. We also talked last week a little bit about the difference between trying and training. Anybody remember that part? Kind of like this. If I was to come to you and say, guess what, as a church, we're going to do something great. 3 months from now, we're all going to run a 10K together. Who wants to join with me? And of course, I don't know how many people want to join. I say, we're all going to do it together, okay? Now, what you could do is you could just wait your 3 months doing just like you do right now and show up that day and really, really try hard to run that 10K well. How are you going to do? Probably not so good. But what would happen if you trained for it? Every day, maybe you got out and you started walking. Pretty soon you could get up to a jog, and you could even do some running. And you started training for 3 months. How much better are you going to do? There's a big difference between trying hard and training to make something happen. We are called to train, and that's the important thing. So this week, it's called The Unhurried Life. Now, for many of us, this is going to be crucial to understand. This is the first part of the whole practice. Because if we can't learn the unhurried life to where we can just bring ourselves into God's presence and allow God to do this transforming work with us, then how are we going to pick up any of these other skills that we're supposed to be picking up, these other practices that help us do that? So we have to learn this unhurried life. Jesus modeled this practice for us over and over. Just like the scripture we just read, Jesus often, not every once in a while, Jesus often withdrew to a lonely place and he prayed. And I've been working on this for really the last few weeks and probably even the last few months. This whole idea of trying to get this unhurried life into my life. And I do well some days, I don't do well some days. That's the way it goes. But I've noticed when I try to get myself into this mode where I can get myself away and get this unhurried life and focus on that, the days are different than they are when I don't. Now, for many of us, this might be one of our deepest prayers to get to a point of having the unhurried life. And maybe together we can learn, together, the unhurried life. Now, in the book, John Ortberg talks about his daughters one time, and he called it the D-Da Day, okay? Now, this is an interesting thing. He had toddlers, and as toddlers, you probably know and remember, I know you have some toddlers now, you used to have toddlers. When it comes to bath time and trying to get everybody in their baths, it's like herding cats, isn't it, sometimes? It's crazy. So here he is, he's trying to take care of that, and he's trying to get the kids in the bathtub and everything else, but he had one daughter who liked to escape after she got out of the tub before he could dry her off, and she'd run around in a big circle, and she'd do the D-Da-Day dance and sing and dance and do the D-Da-Day and sing it out loud. And one day he was just kind of frustrated. And I like what he said. He said, now, to his daughter, he said, now get over here. That's enough. He says, we've got to get you dried off. Now hurry. and she asked this very profound question. She said, "Why?" I had no answer. I had nowhere to go, nothing to do, no meeting to attend, no sermon to write. I was just so used to hurrying, so preoccupied with my own little agenda, so trapped in this rut of moving from one task to the next, that right here was life, right here was joy, right here was an invitation to dance right in front of me, and I was missing it. And I thought, wow, that's kind of life, isn't it? We get so used to being in this rut, we've got to go, 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 go. You know, people today, Thomas Kelly says, people today take time much more seriously than they take eternity. And I think what he's saying is eternity's out here, and that's the most important thing, but we're so focused on these things we're trying to do in the midst of time, we lose sight of who we truly are. You understand, we've been made for eternity. This is what the scripture tells us in Ecclesiastes 11. God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. This is who we are, folks. Eternity in our heart. In fact, I believe we're supposed to be focusing on what is eternal, which is our soul, who we are, more than just individual things in this 60, 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 years if you're lucky time that we live. In fact, one of his mentors, a very famous theologian pastor, his name is Dallas Willard, says this: "You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life." Because hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. See, in our culture, in our day, we suffer from a thing called hurry sickness. The thought is, I'm guessing, that busyness is next to godliness. If we can just keep ourselves super busy, then it's just like we are so good and so godly because we kept ourselves busy and we hurried around. And the more hurried we become, the less we rest, the less we focus on what is eternal and important, our soul itself. Hurry tends to be the enemy of our spiritual lives. Hurry can and will keep us from being the person we've always wanted to be. Because in the midst of hurry, we miss life, we miss the moment where we can be in God's presence and that transformation. We miss that awareness of God's presence and purpose around us, and we'll miss those times to dance, I guarantee it. Because in our culture, our nation, our businesses, and even our churches, we love to push hurry sickness, a continuous struggle to accomplish more, achieve more, participate more, do more, all in less and less time. And we keep ourselves overly busy and we wear it like this godly badge of honor. But this was not the way of Jesus at all. Jesus repeatedly and often withdrew from the daily activities, the noise, the busyness, the hurry, the stress. And he got into solitude. And he called his followers to do likewise. So here's our passage today, Mark 6:30-31. Jesus has just sent his apostles out, the disciples out to their first missionary journey. They went out and they ministered to people and they carried out all this ministry and great stuff happened. And he brings them back in. And the apostles gathered together with Jesus after this first missionary journey. And they reported to him all that had happened, all that they taught. And then Jesus says this to them: "Come away by yourselves to a lonely place and rest for a while." See, but the problem was, as Mark writes for us, for there were so many people there coming and going, all these needs that were needed to be met by Jesus and by his apostles, that they didn't even have time to eat. Now, we would think this is kind of a badge of honor, right? You ever said that before? I was so busy, I didn't have a chance to have lunch. I just had to work right through lunch. That's just how important it is and everything that's going on. I'm just busy, busy, busy. Mark didn't mean this as anything good. He's saying it was so busy, they didn't have a chance to eat. And Jesus immediately said, you've got to get away from this so that you can rest. Get away from that hurried life. But can't we wear that like a badge? Isn't that the great thing? Can't I say, God, I was so busy I couldn't even eat. That makes me a super Christian, right? You know what that says? No, this is what makes you. It makes you tired. It makes you hungry. Probably for a lot of us, it makes you hangry. You know what that is, right? And it keeps you from being available to me and to other people. There's nothing good with that. See, Jesus was making a point. You go do this work, and you work hard, and you stay busy, but then you've got to get that rest and that time away. That's important in your life. We must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from our lives. It doesn't mean that we're never going to be busy, because we're going to be busy, and Jesus was often busy. But in the middle of being busy, Jesus was never hurried. Jesus never let busyness sever the life-giving connection between him and his Father, and he always took time to get away and say, I need this time. He never let busyness get in the way of being able to love people and do the things that he needed to do, because he was just so busy and hurried in the midst of it. He observed a regular practice of withdrawing from the activity for the sake of solitude and prayer. And he centered himself in God's love and God's presence. So let me ask the question for you. Are you living the hurried life right now? Okay, I know not too many people want to say, yeah, I am, but I think we are. So I got some examples for you and see if you're like me, okay? I'll admit it. I have been programmed now for decades. Yeah, I know Kathy's clapping. I'll admit it, that for decades I've trained myself now to constantly be hurried, the hurried life. Always move from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. So here's how it is. Here's an example for us. How about we're at the grocery store. Oh, man, we got to get home. But you look up and there's all the lines with carts in them everywhere. What do you do? If you're like me, here's what I do. I'm never really that good at math, but somehow simultaneously I can count at every one of these lines how many people are lined up in them to know which one's the shortest line. Everybody done that? And I also can look inside the carts and see exactly how many items are inside the cart to know which ones are going to be quicker and which ones are going to be slower. And on top of that, I'm looking at which cashier looks like they really know what they're doing and they're getting that stuff going, or which ones kind of look like they're going, I'm kind of lost in the middle of this, and and that kind of thing, all right? I'm also looking at the people. Do they look like they're going to be a debit card user and they're gone? Or are they going to take 10 minutes to get all their groceries put onto the other side and stacked up and then say, this is your price, this is how much it is, and go, oh, let me get my checkbook out of my purse now. And then they go and start digging that out. And they go, now what's the date today? Okay. And then it's like, so you got to weigh it all out. And I say, okay, I'm going to make my choice. This one here, this has got to be the one. And you make your choice and you stand in line and you're impatient, and okay, you're waiting. But as you're doing that, you're looking back and seeing the person in the lines back there that would have been you had you chosen those lines, right? Because you got to see who's going to get out first. Is it going to be me or is it going to be those persons? Because if it's one of those persons, I lost and I'm frustrated. I'm like, man, I knew it. Never choose the right one. But if it is me and I'm the first one out, I walk out of the store like I'm the champion. Yes, thank you. I'm like, whew. I'm going to give thanks to my mom and dad and God and everybody else for getting me through this thing, and I was the first one out, and I'm so excited, right? When I shop, I like to be incognito. Some of you know that. I put my hat on, and I'm just kind of like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want anybody to see me. I'm a little wallflower just working through here, and not long ago, I'm out shopping. All the lines are long. I make my choice. I get there, and I just get myself in line, and here I am. And the guy right in front of me turns around, looks at me right in the eye, and I go, uh-oh. And he says, you know what I like to do when there's long lines? I like to strike up conversation. And I go, no. Oh, for the love of all that's good, please, no. And then he says, yeah, I'd like to talk to people. So I'm looking around, I go, anybody here want to talk to this guy? Anybody? Okay, so I talk to him. And it's okay because it does pass the time a little quicker, and everything's good. Is that you? You might have the hurried life. Another scenario. You're driving down the road, lots of lanes, and there's a red light. Why are you pointing at me? I don't understand this. It's amazing how quickly my brain looks up in front of me in all the lanes and sees year, make, and model of every vehicle. And it looks like, who is driving this person? Does this person look younger? Do they look older? Do they seem preoccupied? Does this look like the person who's really going to take off? Or is this a person who's going to kind of slow? And are they fiddling around with their phone? Okay, I got to get all these things in line so I know which lane to choose. Now, if there's ever semis or anything, a big truck, you got to get away from that lane because that's not going to be the fast lane, right? Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes I get in the other lane. I'm like, how come these people can't go faster than a loaded semi from the red light? I don't understand, but they just don't go. And I just, anybody else frustrated sometimes and you a little hurried? Think about that. How about multitasking? In his book, he's funny. He says, multitasking. Multitasking means doing more than one thing at a time, but it takes too long to say that, so we just say multitasking and get going as fast as we can, right? Where do we do most of our multitasking today? Where do you see it? In the car. Is it not? Somebody going down the road, they're driving with one knee, they got their coffee here, their phone's over here, they got the sandwich on the other knee they pick up, and they're in the middle of everything, and they're playing with their radio, and then, of course, they're shaving because they didn't get up early enough, or they're putting on their makeup, and you ever see that? I see that all the time, driving past somebody, and they're putting their makeup on and stuff. I'm like going, oh my goodness, multitasking everywhere because, man, we got to go, right? What's that? With their dog in their lap, exactly. Sharing lunch with their dog. In the 90s, there was a movie called Running Scared. I don't know if anybody ever seen it. Gregory Hines and Billy Crystal. It was an interesting movie, just a comedy, but it stuck out to me because they were Chicago policemen living in the rat race, man. That just everything was going. They were just driven, that hurried life. And they got in trouble, and their boss made them go take a long vacation, okay? So they took a long vacation. They said, we're going to go as far south as we can, got down to the Florida Keys. And they got down there, and man, they were wired down there, but everybody else wasn't so much. And the first night they get there, everybody goes out to the beach, and they're standing around, and they're like, oh my goodness, somebody must have drowned or something. What's going on? So they run out, they go, what happened? And they go, nothing, we're just watching the sunset. And they were like, what planet did we land on? What is going on? Watching the sunset? And they said, but we'll try it. And they watched it that night, and then the next night they went back, and the next night we went back. And pretty soon they were enjoying just relaxing. And then the next scene, of course, they have to go back to Chicago and do the rest of their work, and they're sitting in the back of this taxi cab, and they're just relaxed, kicking back, and they're looking around going, what is wrong with all these people here? They're so hurried, and it's just crazy here. What is going on? And I say that because I truly believe we can learn with practice how to live the unhurried life if we do it, if we're willing to do it. But probably the most serious issue of this hurry sickness is a diminished capacity to love. And I like how John Ortberg puts this. He says, love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love always takes time, and time is the one thing hurried people don't have. Isn't that the truth? Well, when I find some time, you're never going to find time. You make time. And I think far too often we're just so busy and we're so tired that we can't give our best to God. We can't give our best to others. We can't give especially to the ones who need it most within our lives, our families. Jesus was often busy, but he was never hurried. Never allowed the busyness of life to keep him from his relationship with God where he needed it and from doing the things he needed to do. So I've got 3 things I'm hoping we can work on together. Can we do this? Give it a try? 3 things to help us live the unhurried life. Number 1, just comes to us immediately out of the beginning of Mark, chapter 1, 35 to 37. In the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went out to a secluded place and was praying there. Simon Peter and his companions searched for him. And when they found him, they said, Jesus, Everybody's looking for you. What are you doing out here? There's lots of stuff that's got to happen, and we're looking for you, and you're out here praying in the dark. Basically, is what Mark's trying to tell us. Jesus left the busyness of life and ministry, withdrew to a solitary place for prayer and connection with God. See, this was his source of strength, his source of power, his source of direction, his source of peace. He centered himself in God's love and presence. In fact, on my phone, I have an app from our health insurance that keeps track of healthy habits. And they made one up for pastors. And you know what the one is? And I try and do it every day as the best I can. It says, did you center yourself in God's grace for 5 minutes today? I keep trying to do that. It's important. Learning to just sit, learning to clear my mind of the busyness of the day, the hurry, the stress, everything that's going to happen, and just go, okay, God, I'm going to focus upon you. I'm going to focus upon your unconditional love for me, that you just love me just because I am, not because of what I can produce, just because of who I am, you love me. Your grace that you pour into my life, which allows me even to be in a relationship with you, and your presence. Now, here we are. And it changes the entire day. It's amazing. 5 minutes to just say, here it is, God. So, and we got to find a place to do that. See, I can't do that in my office. Too much stress in there. I have to get to another spot to do it. Could we, number one, take time to center yourself in God's love, grace, and presence for 5 minutes a day? Could we commit to do that? So here it is. And probably the best time to do it is in the morning before all the stress begins to really hit you. To arrange your life around a practice that helps you let go of hurry. Number 2 comes to us out of Mark chapter 4. I want you to get this one now. I'm going to tell the wider story of what's happening here. In verses 35 and 36, and said, that day when evening come, he said to his disciples, we're going to go over to the other side of the lake now. We got to get away from here and go find some rest over here on the other side. Now look at verse 36. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, and just as he was in the boat, and there were other boats that went with him. See, Jesus knew work still had to be done. Jesus knew ministry still had to be done. Jesus knew there were lives that were in need. Important stuff had to happen. But look what Jesus did. All these people coming to Jesus. We need you, Jesus. All this stuff. We need you, we need you, we need you. And Jesus said no. Leaving the crowd behind, important stuff. He went to go deal with what he had to do. Find that time with God and that rest. I truly believe this. Now, what happened is, it's interesting because as they took off, Jesus falls asleep in the boat. A huge storm comes up. Everything's quaking and shaking, and they think, oh my gosh, we're going to die. And they wake Jesus up. Don't you care that we're going to die out here? And I could just imagine Jesus waking up going, oh, okay. He stands up. He says, peace, be still. And everything goes calm. And I can imagine Jesus immediately going right back to bed and falling asleep again. Here's what we find out. Jesus set boundaries around his time. Do you know you can do that? You can set boundaries around your time. One of my great mentors, Chip Gast, who was a pastor and a superintendent here in the conference, he said this to me. He said, Tom, you are in control of your time. Did you know that? You're in control of your time. Above that, he said, you can also say no. Can I just let you know you all have permission to say no? Now, don't say no all the time. I mean, that's not it. Preacher said we never have to do a thing again. The rest of our lives we get to say no. But I'm saying there are times where you say, no, I cannot do that. And maybe it's because I need this time for myself, not because I'm doing 15 other things. Setting boundaries around your time. This is self-care. Nobody else is going to give it to you unless you take it and do it. Jesus took time to get away and rest and focus on that important thing, his relationship with God. And I said before, and I'll say it again, your not to-do list is just as important as your to-do list if we get it right. Number 3, Matthew 14. See, Jesus knew he needed some solitude, some quiet time. So he gets in the boat with the disciples, and they sail over to a different part of the sea, and they get out on the shore, and guess what happens? All the crowds found him there that he was trying to get away from, and they all swarmed him again. And Jesus has compassion, and he heals them and does all kinds of amazing things with them. And then right after that, there's nobody around to get food for them, and there's 5,000 men, not including women and children. So Jesus creates and has this incredible miracle with just a handful of fish and loaves of bread. He feeds 5,000. The feeding of 5,000 happens here. Now listen to what happens right here. You get to about verses 22 and 23. Jesus immediately made his disciples get into the boat and go to the other side. Immediately, go. You've got to get out of here. While he dismissed the crowd, you all got to go home too. And then he went by himself up on the mountainside and he prayed. See, Jesus understood his need for solitude. He understood the disciples' need for solitude and to get away. This was his connection to God the Father, to get his strength, his clarity. This is the thing that was for the well-being of his very soul. And so he worked towards solitude. See, solitude is the one place where you can gain freedom from the forces of society and life that will otherwise relentlessly try to mold you. The daily pressures, people's wants, people's needs, deadlines, productivity concerns, always coming upon you. And as you withdraw from the bombardment of life, you begin to recognize the lethal environment of the life and the noise and the concerns and the pressure and the stress. Solitude simply means to not do, to refrain from society. It's not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of all that distraction. And Jesus said, I need that solitude. I need it. We must learn the importance and benefit of that solitude. It might just be minutes at some time. I got to get away for 5 minutes. Might be hours. Might be days. Find the solitude. So will you join with me? Here are some ways to begin the practice of the unhurried life. Number 1, will you take time to center yourself in God's love, grace, and presence for 5 minutes a day? 2, learn to set boundaries around your time, even if it means leaving important things undone. You've got to set those boundaries. Number 3, learn the importance and the benefit of solitude, getting away to refocus and rest. Probably the easiest thing would be to say, everybody needs to try and pick one of those things, and you know which one you really need in your life, and say, I'm going to work on that this week. I've got to get the unhurried life here, because once I can get the unhurried life, I can begin to look at all these other practices that are going to help me be in the presence of God where I need to be. So as we conclude, one more time, you ready? You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life.